Hey there! In this video, we're going to build a command line chat application. My name's Alex, and I normally run a YouTube channel called Codecast. You can find a link around here somewhere. The other day, my friend Hugo and we built a little command line chat application and wrote about it over on Medium. And I thought it would be a really pleasant, casual project to teach you how to build step by step here on the freeCodeCamp YouTube channel. In terms of prerequisites or what you need to know already, it would be good if you had some basic JavaScript and Node.js knowledge already, but you might benefit from seeing some things you haven't learned yet, so I'll leave that up to you. A big component of our app will be a tool that I'm helping to build over here at Pusher called Chatkit. Chatkit, in a nutshell, it's a hosted API that makes it easier to build chat functionality into our applications. Functionality like real-time messaging, typing indicators, read indicators, which in turn we can use to power unread message counts and read receipts, that kind of thing. You might get the idea, and if you don't, it's okay. One of the best ways to learn is by doing. So on that note, let's jump in and create a Chatkit account. To do that, head over to pusher.com/chatkit and hit sign up. I already have an account, so I'll click sign in instead and log into my existing account. From here, we can create a new Chatkit instance by clicking on create new. I'm going to call mine command line chat. And for now, that's all we're going to do in the dashboard. We'll be coming back here in a second to make some updates, but for the time being, I'm going to switch back to the terminal and make a new directory called command line chat tutorial and run npm init-y to initialize my package.json file. The first thing we'll want to do for this project is create a Chatkit authentication server, which sounds complicated and it really isn't. In fact, it's something that's so common when you use Chatkit that I've created a little snippet here that we can copy and paste to kickstart this project. So head over to the description to find this link, copy and paste it real quick, and in a new file called server.js, we can paste it. At the top here, you can see we import some third-party npm modules, which we'll need to install. So let's quickly install Express. The Express body parser middleware, which allows our server to parse request bodies to get their data. The Cause Express middleware, which can enable cross-origin resource sharing. And of course, we'll need the Pusher Chatkit server, Node or client SDK as well. Speaking of which, if we scroll a little bit below the imports, you can see that we instantiate the Chatkit server SDK. And as we do so, we pass down an instance locator and a secret key, both of which you can access from the Chatkit dashboard. So head over there and under the Keys tab, copy your unique instance locator and paste it in place of the placeholder. You'll also want to grab the secret key and replace the placeholder with that as well. I won't explain this file in too much depth, but we basically set up that middleware we installed and then creates a root called /users, which in a nutshell accepts a username and then creates a Chatkit user with that username if a user with that username does not already exist. If a user with that username already exists, it basically does nothing. It just returns a successful response to the client. In a real world application, obviously two users with the same ID or username can't exist at the same time, and so the logic would likely be different. But for our fairly simple application, this is good enough. Similarly, down here, we create an Authenticate Endpoint, which is a little bit contrived as well. The Authenticate Endpoint is your opportunity to validate that a user is who they say they are. However, in this particular case, we're not really going to authenticate users. We're not going to ask them for a password or anything like that. So this function is fairly, like I say, contrived. It simply returns a token no matter what. And that's okay for the purposes of this application. At the very bottom, we obviously set up the server as well, make sure it's running. And that's pretty much it for the server application. We could run it now, but there wouldn't be much to see. We'll come back and run it later when it's more useful. Next, let's create a new file called client.js. And in here, I'm going to start by creating a new function called main. And this is going to be an async function that we pretty much call immediately. And the reason why we do this is so that we can use the await keyword within the main function. If you're not too comfortable with the async and await keywords, then I highly recommend this talk by Wes Boz over here on the freeCodeCamp YouTube channel. Now, the first thing we'll want to do when the user runs our application is ask them for their username. We'll subsequently use this username to create a Chatkit user via the server we just created. Now, to ask the user for their username, I'm going to use an npm module called prompt. Now, the way prompt works simply is that you install it and import it just like you would most npm modules. You call a function called start to initialize the module, and then most interaction happens via this get function, to which you firstly pass some options. We'll explore this in more detail in a second, as well as typically a callback function, which is called when the user successfully or erroneously enters an input. We might tweak this a little bit to use promises, but let's start off with the basics by installing prompt. So if I head over to the terminal and quickly run npm install -- save prompt, and then just like we saw in the npm docs, we can write prompt.start, and whereas we would normally call prompt.get, what I'm going to do is import another module called util. And I'm going to create a new function called get, and I'm going to set it equal to util.promisify prompt.get. Now, instead of calling prompt.get, which takes a callback function, we're going to call get this local variable instead, which is equal to a function that returns a promise now, which is going to enable us to use get with the await keyword, like this. Like I skimmed over earlier, the get function takes an options argument. Really, this is a schema, which is quite an overloaded term in programming, but basically it's an outline of what we expect from the user. This will be the username schema. The description is basically what you want to present to the user, so we'll say enter your username, and then we specify the name by which we want to reference the user's input later, so I'll write username. Then it's really just a case of creating a result variable and awaiting the results of get username schema. On this result, we can access the username, which is basically the name that we supplied above, right? In fact, we can do this in one step just by using object destructuring like this. And just to make sure everything is working nice and fine, let's log out the username to the console. As you can see, when we run the client, it asks us for our username. I write Booker, and Booker is written to the console. One thing I don't really like is this prompt text at the beginning of my description. The way to disable that really simply is to set prompt.message, I think, equal to an empty string. Yeah, now you can see when we run that, we don't have that black prompt text. Never mind this error, I just killed the application. In fact, yes, come to think of it, we should probably wrap most of this function inside of a try-catch block. If an error happens, we'll write it to the console and call process.exit with the status code 1. This will just make things a little bit easier to debug if things go wrong. This is also a good time to mention that you might notice at times that when I write my code, it's kind of indented all over the place, or maybe it's not as optimal as it could be. For example, I have superfluous parentheses or something like that. Yet when I save my file, everything gets nice and tidy. That's thanks to a JavaScript tool called Prettier, which I have integrated in my editor. Super cool tool. Check it out if you haven't heard of it already. But yeah, now we have this username down here, we're going to want to send it to the server where we can create a Chatkit user. And to do that, I'm going to use a third-party module called Axios. So let's bring in Axios real quick. And then I'll create a separate function called createUser that takes a username. It's going to be an async function. And then we're going to send a post request using Axios to HTTP localhost port 3001, I think. I'll double check in a second, /users. And then we'll specify the body to be equal to the username. And again, we should probably wrap this in a try catch block just in case something goes wrong. Let me quickly check server.js for the port number. As you can see, it's 3001, perfect. So that down here, instead of printing the user to the console, we can write create user, and we'll actually need to await that result right there. Let's test this out real quick. So let me create another split here where I'll run the server. Remember I said it wasn't really useful to run before, but now it is. If I run the application and I enter the username Booker, we should see in the server output, and we do, that a user called Booker was created. If I run the client again and I try and essentially log in as Booker again, now the user already exists. We see that written to the server as well. Pretty cool, right? Do you know what else is pretty cool? Connecting to Chatkit. So while I'm here, I'm going to install the Pusher Chatkit client SDK. The reason why I say it so slowly is because it's important to realize that earlier we installed the server Chatkit SDK, and now we're installing the client Chatkit SDK. Often these would happen in different projects, but because we're kind of condensing them, it might seem a bit confusing. At the top here, we can import Chatkit. In fact, specifically, we're going to want to bring in the Chatkit Chat Manager and the Chatkit Token Provider. And then down here, just beneath the call to create user, I'm going to initialize Chatkit, or more specifically, the Chatkit Chat Manager. I have a handy little snippet for this because I do it quite often. The first thing you need to do when initializing the Chat Manager is specify your instance locator. Now, this is the same instance locator we copied earlier from the dashboard. So let's copy it again, or copy it from your server file. It's the exact same. The user ID in our case is going to be equal to the user's username. This can be a string or a number. In our case, it makes sense to use the username because that's all we really have. And just like we specified the user's endpoint up here, down here we need to specify the Authenticate Endpoint. So let's do that now. Localhost port 3001/authenticate. In that same snippet, I call chatmanager.connect and assign the result to a variable, or a constant, called current user. Now this represents the current user. We should be able to come here and print the current user to the console, and we can poke around to see what is available on that current user. Spoiler, most interactions with Chatkit happen on this current user. For example, we'll call current user.send message and so on. But actually, I can tell you right away that this is not going to work. If we ran this application now, it would blow up. And the simple reason is that the Chatkit client SDK, this module we import up here, doesn't work with Node.js out of the box. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, I work on the Chatkit team, and when we started building this client SDK, it was mainly built against the web browser, which means internally it uses some functions which exist in the web browser, but not in Node.js. So to use the Chatkit client in Node.js, we basically need to, for lack of a better word, trick Chatkit into thinking it's working in the browser. To do this, we can use an npm module called JS-DOM, which we'll need to import. And then we'll create a function called make Chatkit node compatible. This is a snippet I defined for the sake of this screencast because otherwise I wouldn't have remembered the details. But what it really boils down to is creating this global.window property that Chatkit needs internally. We'll need to make sure to call this function. And then once that's all set up, we should, I think, be able to connect to Chatkit and view our current user. So let's run the server so we have something to connect to. Once that's running, we'll run the client and connect as Booker and see what happens. As you can see, once we connect, we get, this input's hard to read, obviously, it's a lot of text and a pretty big font, but you can get an idea of the kind of functions and properties available on this current user. We won't spend too much time looking at it actually because it's quite hard to discern the useful stuff from the sort of prototype output and stuff. But you can see, for example, we have like the user's name here. So we could access the current user's name by writing current user.name and so on. We'll see this all in action soon enough. Let's allow the user to choose a room to join. And the way we'll do this, firstly, is by creating a variable called Joinable rooms. And we're going to set this equal to the result of current user.getJoinable rooms. Then we'll create a variable beneath it called available rooms. I'll explain the distinction in a second, but in a nutshell, we take the current user.rooms property and the joinable rooms constant we just defined, and we merge these two arrays. Now what's happening here? Because it seems like we're conflating two ideas. I say that we're going to allow a user to join a room, but then we have two concepts, joinable and available rooms. Well, in Chatkit, basically you have this concept of a joinable room. It's a room the Chatkit user is eligible to join. They have permission to do so and the room exists, but they haven't yet joined. Once they join that room, it's said that the user belongs to that room. And so you can access an array of all the rooms that a user belongs to via this current user.rooms property. Now, there's a difference between how you represent this in our code and how we present it to the user. The way we'll present it to the user is that all rooms are joinable even if the user has already joined the room. This might sound complicated, so it might be a bit easier to see it in action. Once we have this available rooms property, what we'll do is we'll write them all to the console. So we'll write available rooms.forEach. We'll take the room and we'll take the index and we'll print that to the console. So we'll print out the index, and then we'll print out the room name. You know, if we ran this right now, we wouldn't actually see anything because we haven't created any Chatkit rooms. We have to do that ourselves, and there are two ways of approaching this. We can either create rooms programmatically using one of the SDKs, and this is the recommended way, and in any real application, this is likely the only way. For example, imagine you're building an application similar to Slack or similar to Messenger. When someone creates a new group, you know, you're going to need to write some code that creates that group dynamically, invites members dynamically, all that kind of stuff. Because we kind of know our parameters here, because this is a tutorial, we're going to use the second approach, which is to use the Chatkit dashboard, and more specifically, the Chatkit dashboard inspector. Inspector. Here we can create an admin user and then create a room. I'll call mine general. In fact, I'll create two. I'll create one called General and I'll create one called freeCodeCamp, which can be a chat room that people can come to talk about freeCodeCamp. Now we have those two rooms. I would expect that if I run the server and if I run the client and connect it as Booker, we should be shown a list of available rooms, and we probably are. We are actually, but this is a bit broken, and let's debug this together. First of all, the output's a bit messed up because we're still printing out the current user. Let's fix that. The second problem, I think, is that we see the room index 0 and it says it's undefined, and I'm trying to think why that is. Oh, I know why. It's because in addition to destructuring the current user.rooms property, we'll also need to destructure the joinable rooms constant. And if you're not familiar with destructuring, I should have mentioned this earlier, I'm going to make sure to link a tutorial in the description. It might be a confusing concept, as I even myself got confused just then apparently, but in a nutshell, it enables you to join arrays. Let's try this again. Hopefully now we see a cleaner input and the expected input no less. As you can see, we have the option to join the general room or the freeCodeCamp room. Next, let's prompt the user to choose one of those rooms. And so let me just bring this up a little bit, and then we'll create another schema. This time we'll call this room schema. The description is going to be select a room, and we'll call this input chosen room. We'll come down here and type const chosen room equals await get. This is the same get function we defined earlier. Remember this guy? And then we'll pass in the room schema. Once we have that, we can actually pull down the room using the index, which is essentially what the user supplied, right? They enter the number 0 or 1 in this case. That will correspond to an index in the array, in that available rooms array that I'm highlighting right now. And so we can write available rooms chosen room, and then it's time to subscribe to that room. I have a snippet which can help me do this called subscribe or sub because I'm lazy and I do this a lot. The room ID is going to be equal to room.id. In fact, let me take a step back here. This subscribe to room function takes a few different options. Firstly, it takes the room ID, namely the room to subscribe to. In this case, it's going to be whichever room the user selects. Then we have the opportunity to specify some hooks. The idea of hooks might be familiar to you, but it might be more easy to understand if you think about them as events and event handlers. For instance, whenever a new message is sent in our chat room, this onNewMessage function is going to be called. This function is going to be called when the current user sends a message. That happens in real time, which is fairly unimpressive, right? Calling a function on the same client that cause that function to be executed. But the place where Chatkit really comes in here is that if we distribute this chat application to a bunch of our friends or a bunch of users, as they send messages in the same room, this onNewMessage function is going to get executed in real time with their messages. Here we can write the messages to the console. We'll want to include the message.sender ID, which is essentially their username in our case, as well as the message text itself. And actually, we're only going to print this message if the message.sender ID is not equal to our username. Because if we're the person who sent the message, we don't need that to be relayed to ourselves because we're going to see it in the terminal input anyway. There's no need, obviously, to notify the current user that they sent a message. Of course they know. This is tricky to demonstrate because whilst we can subscribe to messages, we can't actually send messages yet. Let's do that now. We'll want to capture the user input repeatedly, right? So we'll want the user to be able to send one message and then another and so on. Now we could probably adapt the prompt npm module to do this, but there's actually a much more suitable module called readline, which I'll install now. So I'll write npm install --save readline. Actually, I did notice this when I started recording this screencast, but it seems like in Node 10 there's another module called line by line that might be a bit more suitable. I'll leave that up to you to look into. I'm going to use readline because it's what I know. And what I know about readline is that you need to import it. Well, I know more than that. That's pretty obvious, I would say. But yeah, we'll import readline. And then down here, beneath our call to subscribe to a room, we're going to want to create a constant called input that we're going to set equal to readline.createInterface. And when we call createInterface, we specify an input option, which is going to be equal to process.stdin. stdin is like a fancy word for the terminal input, basically. We often refer to the output as stdout as well, which you might find interesting if you didn't know already. Then we can call input.onLine, and then we'll create an async callback function which gives us that line or that text basically. And from here we can write current user.sendMessage. When we call send message, we need to specify the room that we're sending that message to. All messages have to be sent to a room, so that'll be equal to room.id, and then the message itself, which is going to be equal to the text property. That looks good. Let's test this out. I think this should pretty much work how we expect. And as ever, I'll run the server, then connect with the client. In fact, do you know what? Let's create a new window here. First, we'll run the server. Then we'll run one client. And then we'll run another client. So in this first client, we'll say my name's Booker. In this client, I'll say my name is Hugo. Hugo co-wrote the tutorial with me. Awesome dude. And we'll both join the freeCodeCamp channel. So I'll join the freeCodeCamp channel, and then I'll join the freeCodeCamp channel for Hugo. And then, to be honest, as I'm doing this now, it would be nice to have some indication as to when we've connected. Right now, it just feels a bit laggy. But if I write hello, we should see in the other console on the right there that Booker said hello, and we don't, which is really sad. Let's figure out why. So we get an error here which says it expected room ID to be of type number, but was of type undefined. And that's quite strange because I really don't see why room would be undefined here. Which line did that happen on? Line 85. So yeah, right here. So what I'm doing is I'm looking up here where I access room.id, and I'm sure this worked, and so room.id can't be undefined. That wouldn't make sense to me anyway. But I'm looking at the wrong side of the assignment. what I'm actually doing here is assigning a property called room ID, and down here, I'm assigning it to a property called room, and what I meant to write is room ID. Let's save that and try again. So let's just kill these clients real quick and rerun them. I'll connect as Booker, then as a new user. Let's call that new user Bob. We'll both join the freeCodeCamp room. And here I can write hello. And as I write hello, we should see that in the other window, Booker said hello. Bob can then say hi back, and we can see in the other window that Bob said hi. You know, obviously these two clients are running side by side on the same machine in the same terminal, but we could equally send this file to a friend. You know, Hugo lives in Australia, I live in London. We can both communicate on completely different machines across the ocean. Such is the internet, which isn't that impressive, but I just want to re-emphasize that even though this is happening locally, it would also work remotely. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up the tutorial. In summary, we built a chat application where we can create users, create rooms, join rooms, then send and receive messages. There's so much more we could do to this application if we had time, from both a chat perspective and a terminal perspective, right? So we're barely touching the surface of what Chatkit can do. We're barely touching the surface of what you can build in the terminal. One cool idea Hugo and I had was if we could list a list of online users as well as users who have joined the chat previously but aren't online. That would be such a cool terminal interface, and it would use a feature of Chatkit called Chatkit Presence, basically. We could even show typing indicators and read receipts, so many cool things, but like I say, we need to give it a rest for now. If you'd be interested to learn more, if you want to see a continuation of this application, a part 2 if you will, please let us know in the YouTube comments or in the comments over on Medium. You might also want to check out the Medium post, because in addition to what you've just seen me build right here, we also outline how to add a loading spinner to your application, which is a really nifty way to make your application feel faster, as well as just for a bit of fun, right? But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please do make sure to subscribe both to the freeCodeCamp YouTube channel as well as myself over on the Codecast YouTube channel. You can also follow myself on Twitter. I'm at BookerCodes. Thank you.